Okay, my story. So I grew up in a Christian home, so I don't really define my story as when I learned about God or accepted him into my life because he was always a part of my life. I more define it as when I made my faith my own and started living for him, which for me was in November of 2011. The story of how it happened is kind of funny. My brothers were watching me while my parents were out for the night, and they forced me to watch a movie that I didn't want to watch called 2012. Now, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it's a movie about the world ending. And me being 9 at the time, I was terrified because I thought that it was real. I was looking at all these scary things that were happening and was like, oh my gosh, this is gonna happen one day, and what am I gonna do? And I was just terrified. And when my parents got home that night, it was like 11:30 and I was still awake, and they were like, why are you awake? And I just told them, like, was having a breakdown. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like so scared, the world is gonna end, and just was freaking out. And they calmed me down and they told me about some of the passages in the Bible that talk about how no man knows the day, and they also just talked about when the world does end, what that's gonna look like, and how God will take us up to heaven right away, so we don't have to worry about all of the nasty things that are going to happen on earth and all of that, and just that ultimately God would be with me and protect me through it all. And that was comforting. And then they prayed with me, and then I went to bed, and I was able to sleep soundly that night. And that kind of just changed something in my life. Ever since that day, I decided that I wanted to be more involved in church and in Awana when we were doing that at the time, and just stuff like that, and just more involved with praying and reading my Bible and making my relationship with God my own. And so I did, and that kind of started this fiery passion for God and this fiery passion to grow in my relationship with him, which I needed for what was going to come in the next couple of years. In 2014, my family got offered to take in a foster child, and we accepted. He was born addicted to drugs, and his parents, it just didn't seem like they were gonna get their act together, and so we took him, and we had the thought that one day we would get to adopt him. And he stayed with us for about 2 years, and the whole entire time it was just a roller coaster of thinking that he was going to stay with us, and then thinking that he was going to go back to his parents, and then he was going to stay with us, he was going to go back, and it was just really hard that whole time, especially because he came to us when he was 5.5 weeks old, and then he stayed with us until just before his 2nd birthday, and so he was our own practically. It seemed like he was just another part of the family. And in the end, he did end up going back to his parents under pretty bad circumstances, and the parents cut contact with us, and we never got to see him again or talk to him again or talk to them again. And that was obviously really hard for me and my whole family. I know I took it really hard and just fell into a period of depression because of the grief that I was feeling and the fact that I didn't know what to do with that grief. A couple months after he left, we got a phone call about a different foster child that they said they wanted to come stay at our house. And even though we were all hesitant about it, ultimately we felt that it was what God was calling us to do. And so we took in the second foster child. She was with us for a little over a year, and then she also went back to her parents under bad circumstances, and contact was cut, and we never got to see her again. And so having that happen twice in a row was very difficult, and since I never really worked through the depression that I was feeling from the first foster child, the second one adding on top of that just made it so much worse. And for like 2 or 3 years, I just struggled with really bad depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts, and I just didn't really think that I wanted to live anymore. And I remember trying to work through all of the things that I was feeling, trying to figure out how to get better. I remember at one point Googling grief and seeing the 5 stages of grief and how one of them was depression. And I was like, oh good, this is just a stage. One day it'll go away. However, years had gone by and it hadn't. And so I kind of just thought that that was going to be my life. And I was ashamed of the fact that I had depression for no real reason. It was just Satan trying to keep me trapped in the things that I was feeling. And since I was ashamed of it, I only told one person about it, one friend. And she was constantly encouraging me to get help, to tell more people, to do whatever it is I needed to do. And I'm glad that she did that. She was super helpful, but in most of the things that she suggested to me, I didn't listen to her. I never really told anyone about it because, once again, I was ashamed. I was always the person who everyone thought was bright and happy and didn't have any problems under the surface. However, I did. I had a lot. And so I didn't want people to think differently of me because of what I was going through. After years of struggling, I remember at one point just being like, okay, I don't want this to be a struggle anymore. I don't want this to be my life. I was so depressed and anxious that I didn't see a way out, which is why I had considered suicide. I just figured that the best thing for me would be to die and then go to heaven and be with Jesus. However, I felt like God was telling me that I needed to stay, that it wasn't time for me to go be with him yet. And there was one point where I just was like, okay, I need to try and get better. I've been living in this for so long, and I have been trying, but I haven't truly been trying. And so it's time to really try and get it together, try and work through these things that I'm feeling. And I remember going to a Good Friday service shortly after I had made this decision of trying to get better. And I just cried the whole time because there was just so much that God was saying to me in that night, in that service. And I walked out, and Pastor Guy was there. And he saw that I was crying and obviously emotional and upset. And so he kind of pulled me aside and talked to me about what was going on. And I, in that moment, told him everything, which was crazy because, as I mentioned, I had only ever told one person before. So the fact that I had told him was just a God moment, God working in that. But I told him everything, and he said kind of what I was expecting him to say, something along the lines of how he would have never expected it. And I said, yeah, I try and hide it. But ultimately, he just encouraged me to get help. He encouraged me that he thought that I could get better and that I could work through everything. And so shortly after that, I told my parents, and after talking with them, we decided that I should get Christian counseling. And so I did. I met with a Christian counselor for the course of the next 6 months, and after that, working through all of that unresolved grief, I started to get a lot better, and I started to be less anxious about the things in my life, and I started to not be as depressed anymore, and to find reasons to live and to find my identity in Christ and to find my purpose in him and in doing what it was that he wanted me to do. And yes, everything that I went through was difficult, but ultimately I'm glad that it happened because all of it has led me to where I am now. I, a couple years ago, took a Christian counseling class through Fox River because the person who counseled me had taken the class through Fox River, and because of how helpful she was to me, I decided that I wanted to be able to maybe one day be that for someone else. And so I took that class, and now I'm on the team, and I sometimes meet with people to counsel them and help them with their struggles. And that's part of what led me to student ministry now, because I was involved in student ministry when I was struggling, and that was something that was so beneficial for me. And so I want to be able to, once again, just be there for someone else who might be struggling with that, and ultimately to help people realize that they're not alone. Because one of my biggest struggles was the whole time I felt like I was alone, because Satan was telling me that I was, but as he does, he was lying. And so just being able to find that hope in God and in the things that he had in store for me continues to give me hope for this day. I have now been reignited with that fiery passion for Jesus and that love to grow in my relationship with him. And ultimately, there are still days where I struggle, of course, but I'm just excited for what God has in store for me and excited for everything that has happened that has led me to this point. If you are struggling with depression or anxiety or just any sort of struggle in general, and you feel alone, you feel lost, you feel like there isn't a way out, I want to encourage you that that's not true. And I want to encourage you that you can find a way out and things can and will get better. And if you're ever struggling, just know that you can talk to me. My door is always open. I'm sure there are so many other people in your life who you can talk to as well, but if I'm someone that you're interested in talking to, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk with you about your life and just talk about my story a little more and how that might be beneficial to you in some ways and just the things that I learned and might be able to share. I want to encourage you that God is always working in your life, even if it might seem like there's moments where he's not. He is. I know that that's something that I struggled with. I struggled with feeling like he wasn't there or like he didn't care, which was once again just more lies that the devil was telling me. I also struggled a lot with, God, if you're a good God, why did you let such a bad thing happen? And I really enjoyed getting to talk to some of my small group leaders and some people in my life about those things to then be able to work through them and be provided with new perspectives that then help me change my thought process. And so if you're struggling at all with anything and you want someone to talk to, know that I'm always here, and I'd encourage you to open up about it. Even though it can be scary, it's scary to be vulnerable and to share those things, but there's a lot of strength in that. So don't feel like sharing your emotions makes you weak, because it does not. And I would just encourage you to get help and to talk to someone if you feel like you need that.